This video is about a trip through the Welland Canal aboard a super yacht on a trip from Detroit to Italy. The trip through the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Seaway from Detroit to Newport, Rhode Island was 1,800 nautical miles, almost half the distance to cross the Atlantic. The Welland Canal is a series of 8 locks just over the border into Canada. It separates Lake Erie and Lake Ontario. In the second half of the video, it's about the loading of the yacht onto the Super Servant 4, a ship that sinks 7 metres, almost like a submarine, to allow the boats it's carrying to motor onto its deck. Anyway, let's get started in Detroit. We left Detroit in the afternoon, and the trip across Lake Erie to the entrance to the Welland Canal was just over 200 nautical miles, nearly 400 kilometres. We had a good run across Lake Erie, steaming through the night to arrive at the entrance first thing the next morning. It was foggy that morning. We passed through the first lock, Lock 8, pretty soon after entering the canal. It's 23 nautical miles long, 43 kilometres, the canal. Once we passed Lock 8, we had a 13 nautical mile run to the north to the next lock, Lock 7. After passing Lock 7, here we are at the entrance to Lock 6, which is the beginning of 3 locks back to back, 6, 5 and 4. The water level in Lake Erie is 570 feet, about 175 metres above sea level. Lake Ontario is 330 feet or 100 metres lower than Lake Erie. Most of the drop in height happens between Lock 7 and Lock 1 at the northern end of the canal. If you look at the cabin windows of the ship against the edge of the dock, you can actually see the ship rising. He's heading upstream to Lake Erie. And where we are now, if you noticed on the map, is really close to Niagara Falls. It's a really cool experience riding this water elevator down. It didn't take long once they pulled the plug for the water to empty out.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, good luck with it.
They started building this canal nearly 200 years ago, so ships could get upriver past the falls. The wire on the yellow boom is a ship arrestor to make sure ships don't push forward and damage the gates. Traffic heading upstream. This is the lookout at Lock 3. From here we had only another 6 miles to run until we were out of the canal.
Can you look those up, Tim?
What's that?
Those fenders. Up the rail.
Just check them out.
No,
Oh, move them up, sorry.
There's plenty of interesting traffic in the canal. It was just on nightfall by the time we made our last lock. Once we got out of the canal, we crossed Lake Ontario in the night. By the time I woke up, we were back in narrow waters again, making our way towards Montreal and Quebec City. We didn't stop on this trip. Up until Cornwall, we had Canada on the left and America on the right. Beyond Cornwall, both sides were Canadian. We had more locks to pass through after leaving the Welland Canal, but they were a lot more spaced out.
I just used it very badly.
Nothing. We would quite happy.
Passing Quebec City, picking up a pilot. Once we'd passed Quebec, the St. Lawrence River became wider, and the fresh water from the Great Lakes became more and more salty as we got closer to the Atlantic. After Quebec City, we still had another 1,100 nautical miles, or 2,000 kilometres to run, till we arrived in Newport. The next morning when I woke up, as we got closer to the Gulf, man, was it cold, despite being summer. After 2.5 days more at sea, we made it to Newport, home of the America's Cup. We had 2 nights in the marina at Newport, with 1 day to stretch the legs and prepare the boat for its trip across the Atlantic. The next morning we headed out to meet the Super Servant 4. Deep in the water, just the accommodation up forward, and the exhaust down aft sticking up above the water. The deck of the ship where the boat would finally sit was 5 metres below the surface. We circled around the ship and waited until they called us in. It was a narrow squeeze, but we got in okay. And tied up to the centre railing. Once all the boats were inside, it was about a 6-hour operation, deballasting and raising the ship. And during this time, the divers were busy underwater, propping up the boats so they wouldn't fall over once we were high and dry. You can see here on the railings we're starting to rise. One hour later, we'd come up about another metre. I didn't have a lot of time to watch what was going on deck. I was busy during this time, working with the engineers from the ship to hook up power to the boat, so that once the water level dropped below our intakes, we'd still have power on the boat once I shut down our generator. The crew on the yachts slept on their boats, but they got fed on board the ship. Here's a look at the dining room, or the mess room on board the ship. After about 5 hours, the deck was now just a metre underwater. The divers had done their job. With a ladder off the stern of the boat, it was pretty cool to step down onto the deck and have a walk around under the boat. Now the ship's crew were busy putting supports in place. On our boat, they actually welded the supports in. Notice the cavitation. That's the depth in meters. You can see how deep we were in the water before. These bits for tying up the boat were not that long ago 5 meters underwater. It was time to get off the boat. By 9 o'clock tonight, the ship would be lifting her anchor and heading off for the 2-week voyage across the Atlantic to the port of Olbia on the Italian island of Sardinia. I got these shots out of the window of the plane as I flew into Olbia. After landing, I headed to the port and we got a ride out to the ship at anchor. Unloading the boat happened much faster than loading in Newport. As soon as I had water above our intakes, I could start the generators, disconnect our power and water, and we were off. From here it was a short 200-mile hop to Viareggio, near the Leaning Tower of Pisa. I hope you enjoyed the trip. If you have any questions, leave a comment. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button. Thanks for watching.